I'm pumped for today's guest because this guy's story, straight out of a movie. Kevin McCarthy was a top sales pro. He built one of the biggest Century 21 offices in the country, cashed out of a .com, and then boom, serving 33 months in a federal prison for a white collar crime he didn't knowingly commit. But instead of crumbling, this guy went deep, studied cognitive psychology behind bars, and realized blind spots, not bad intentions, was what got him there. Now he's a best-selling author, certified speaking pro, and CEO of Blind Spots Assessments, and he helps leaders spot the very things that can quietly derail their careers, their teams, and even their lives. He's even got some of his best coaching tips from a prison godfather. Yeah, you're going to want to hear this one. Drop your takeaways or questions in the comments on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to the Coach2Scale YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Let's go. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by CoachEm, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. I'm pumped for today's guest. He's the author of the best-selling book, Blind Spots, Why Good People Make Bad Choices. And he holds the highest certification recognized globally by the speaking industry, the Certified Speaking Professional. An award-winning sales professional, he's built one of the largest Century 21 offices in America and then developed and sold a .com startup. Cool stuff. Now, crazy story. In 2002, his boss was arrested for the largest stock fraud in Washington state history. As a result, Kevin spent 33 months in federal prison for a crime he didn't knowingly commit. But there, he studied cognitive psychology and he recognized and deeply researched the blind spots that ultimately led to his predicament. Currently, he's the founder and CEO of Blind Spots Leadership Development and president of Blind Spots Assessments, a great assessment tool, by the way. Kevin and his team work to empower leaders to uncover their blind spots, harness their innate talent, and drive peak performance through enhanced self-awareness and emotional intelligence. All important stuff. And wow, talk about overcoming adversity and turning lemons into lemonade. Man, oh man. Kevin McCarthy, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here. I appreciate the honor of being invited.
Well, really happy to have you. Loved our initial conversations. Loved learning about the blind spot assessments. Have mine right here. Reflecting on that. Before we get into it, I got to ask the awkward question. I read about it on your. I saw it on your video. Briefly touched on it. No, you don't shy away from it, but 33 months in federal prison. What happened there?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I had blind spots. We'll unveil what that looked like over the time of our talk here together. Really, long story short, as you already alluded to, I was fortunate and blessed to own the 13th largest Century 21 franchise in North America. And then ended up starting a .com company during the craziness of the .com era, if you remember. Yeah. And then I turned around and sold that company to a publicly held company and became a paper millionaire for a brief moment. That was fun. Paper and brief were the key words there.
I sat next to a few of those during the boom. They every day watching it go up, and then unfortunately I sat next to them when it went down too. It wasn't pretty.
Oh boy. Yeah. My stock portfolio dropped faster than a black diamond skier in a downhill slope. It was pretty crazy. Long story short is I ended up taking a consulting role with a company that was a startup, and they had been in business for 5-6 years. So I guess early stage company, but they were going to go public with a massive expansion of what they were doing. Their business plans looked solid. Their performance looked solid. Long story short, I ended up investing before I became a consultant. Then I was asked to become a consultant. The CEO heard about my biz dev background and asked about hiring me for 30 days. Well, that 30 days turned into 15 months working for this guy. and never once saw prison coming. Had no idea that he was committing the largest stock fraud in the history of the state of Washington. So that was the major shift in not just my life, but my career and my understanding of how our decisions are impacted. That was the first thing I did, Matt, is when I got to prison, and by the way, I spent 33 months in a federal prison camp. It's some people called it Martha Stewart prison, but not quite. Huh. It was minimal security, but I had a lot of time on my hands, as you can imagine. I had to ask some very serious questions, the questions that I could ask, but most of us, and myself included, never stop long enough to actually ask, who am I? What was I thinking? How did I get here? Right. And so I started questioning my own ability to reason and to think clearly and make decisions based on good information. And that began my quest down this path of positive psychology, cognitive behavioral psychology, more specific, which is basically cognitive and behavioral, right? Putting what we think and how it impacts how we behave. So that was eye-opening. From that, long story short, again, wrote a book, became bestseller on Amazon in August of 2017. I spoken and shared this story with audiences around the world, and it's been an amazing journey. My passion and mission that came out of this experience, Matt, is to help leaders understand their blind spots so that they can make better decisions, build stronger relationships and connection with their people, and ultimately lead well.
We hear all these stories about nobody in prison's guilty, right? The saying that, nobody, everybody's kind of, they got set up or like whatever.
Yeah.
But what I've gleaned from our conversations, Kevin, is that, you had to serve this time, which is awful. But you're not disputing that something wrong was done. You're just saying, hey, I didn't know I was doing it, and my blind spots got in the way. And if I didn't have those blind spots, I might have known that I was doing something wrong and I wouldn't have done it. Like you're taking responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not like doing the corporate salute and blaming everyone else. Would that be is that a fair way to look at this?
It's absolutely spot on. And I would tell anybody this, and I always do, is I didn't knowingly commit any crime, but I did commit the crimes. I was an active participant. As my attorney said, in fact, just to expound on this core part of the story, I was assigned to a federal public defender, and her and I went back and forth for about a month because she was testing my resolve. She had to find the truth. She had to dig into the facts. And then after about a month, she wanted me to sign a plea bargain that was offered to me. And I, at that point, was refusing to do so. I was like, I want my day in court. I want a jury of my peers to hear the story and to judge me accordingly, right? And I was very adamant about it. And she was adamant about me not going to court. And finally, she looked at me and she said, it just dawned on me, Kevin, why you and I are not seeing eye to eye. You're seeing this through a moral lens. I'm seeing it through a legal lens. She said, morally, I totally believe you now. She goes, in fact, I know I can convince a jury that you didn't know your boss was committing crimes. She said, but it doesn't matter. She said, you're not being charged with fraud. She goes, you'll be charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. She said, and under federal conspiracy laws, only one person actually has to know a crime is being committed. You knew what you did, and you aided him in his crime without realizing he was actually committing a massive fraud. So the minute you posted, or the minute you put those envelopes in the mail, as an example she gave me, at his request to the investors, she said, you became an unwitting accomplice in his crime. Now, when it's all said and done, Matt, when sitting down with the prosecutors and everybody else, I never went to court. I never got charged formally. I took a plea bargain and then aided the government in their final stretch of the case. But what it boiled down to is there was a smoking gun, and the prosecutor even said, he goes, "I get it. You didn't know." He said, "But when you participated in this conversation, at that point, you had a choice to make. You could have blown the whistle, or you could have did what you did, which is just hope that it was a real deal and move forward with that action." And so I was guilty. I got stuck with this moral dilemma, which I won't, sidetrack us too much with the details, because it is in the book. There's no hold bars, everything in the book.
Links to that book in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think it's super important. And I can say this as, 54 years old now, but as a 30-year-old leader, first time leader, I was put in a position where I did something that was part of doing business at that time in that place. And it didn't seem right, but it didn't seem like a big deal. And I did it. And then we got in trouble. And HR came in, and the senior leadership. And the friggin' problem, Kevin, is senior leadership was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you guys did this." And I'm thinking, wait, you told me to do it. And I'm a city kid. I grew up in the environment where snitches get stitches. They asked me about my boss. Oh, my boss didn't know anything. And again, it was this seemingly little thing, but the little thing was, it didn't feel right, but everyone else was doing it. Just kind of went along with it. It didn't take long to figure out that, oh my God, yeah, that was really stupid. That was fraud. Like what we did, again, it was fraud. Like this in the court of law, is it or isn't it? It didn't, it doesn't matter like what it was, but it's stupid. And everybody did it. But the fact that everybody did it doesn't mean it's right. And fortunately, we got us like a thing in our file, and nothing happened. But I learned a lot. It's like, wow, if it doesn't seem right, don't do it. And then just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean you should do it. And like and don't expect anybody above you to have your back when the shit hits the fan, because they ran, and I lost total respect for these people. And this was 26 years ago, so, or give or take. So, so interesting. I get it. And so the point I was trying to make there, it's kind of like therapy here. We could burn this tape, but the point that I was trying to make is that there's so many leaders, so many people in these organizations, the types of organizations that I've worked for and I've worked with for the past, 30 years, that are doing things that they don't know is wrong, but they might think is wrong, and they might have blind spots to it. So I usually ask a myth buster question, Kevin, like what's the biggest myth in the business? But I'm going to ask it a different way. What's the biggest blind spot? What's the biggest blind spot that you run across potentially that, leaders may have who are leading and running sales teams? Is that a fair way to ask that question?
Sure. And the answer would be there's a lot more than one. But a very common blind spot, especially in sales, is the concept of selling to everyone the same way, and not taking into consideration the personality temperament of the person you're selling to. For example, I'm in the blind spot assessment, I'm an energizer. That's that competitor motivator mix, right? And my style is pretty much I like it. I like candid talk, bullet points and punchlines, get to the end result real quick. I don't like the fluff, and I'm not really into storytelling, although I'm a storyteller, right?
Right.
But that's where my motivator side kicks in. But left to myself and my natural style of communication, I'd rather you just tell me the way it is, tell me quickly, let me know if there's a problem or solution that needs to be dealt with, and then let's get on with it, right? Whereas some personalities, they're all about, they want to express and tell the story and fill in all the gaps. And when I'm dealing with those folks, if I'm not paying attention, they drive me nuts because I'm like, I don't care about what you had for dinner last night. Get to the point. And so selling is the same way. I had a salesperson call and I was investigating various software applications not too long back. And I wanted to get a demo of one of them, but I already had done my homework. I'm a competitor. I'm going to get it done. Right. And I just set up the demo because I had a few quick questions I wanted to clarify before I made a decision. The salesperson opens up the demo, tries to build rapport with me with questions that competitors sometimes think is stupid and, just get on with it. Right. But I get it. You got to build rapport. And then after building rapport, jumped right into his PowerPoint presentation and started from ground zero and was going to walk me through the whole process.
Once upon a time. Yeah.
And I had to literally stop him. And I was just like, hang on. Now I don't remember his name, but call it Joe. Hang on, Joe. I appreciate that this is how you were trained. And I appreciate this is what you feel like you need to do. I get it. I said, but I already know about your software and I get it. I just need some questions answered. Well, he backed off his presentation and he was able to answer the question. We didn't end up doing business because it wasn't the right fit for me. But my point is we train our salespeople so often, or maybe not enough, and they end up going out and doing the same thing. It's like repeating the same process over and over, not taking into consideration the attention span, the communication style of the people they're speaking with. So they lose out on a lot of opportunities. I would have just hung up on them, in my younger years.
Right. I've had that happen. So you're those decisions, that approach impedes organizational success. And so, you're a speaker, you've been through trainings, like there's the trainer, your consultant, there's senior leadership in the organization. All these people spend a little bit of time with let's call it the individual, in this case, I'll call it a sales team. But the role or the person who's with that sales team the most is their manager, the frontline manager. How important is that position when it comes to organizational success and things like determining blind spots and making sure that the team is selling to people, meeting people where they are, not treating everyone the same way?
That is the cliche of you hit the nail on the head, Matt.
It happens once a day.
Yeah,
maybe.
right. If there is any one major problem in organizations globally, it all boils down to this statement from Gallup. Gallup has been studying this concept of employee engagement for 80 years, more than 80 years. And what they said recently in one of their books, it's called It's the Manager. What they said in that book is that in over 80 years of research by Gallup, the most startling statistic that they've come across is that 70% of the variance in team engagement boils down to the manager. It's the manager. Matt, to answer your question, the biggest problem is the manager. And it's not to say these are bad managers. They're all good managers, good people with good intentions, right? It's just that we're not paying attention as a manager to what these blind spots are and these issues that we create inadvertently with the relationships that we're trying to work with and trying to lead, right? And I say inadvertently because if you think about it, most managers are subject matter experts. In a sales team, a lot of times the hot dogs, the stars, the rising stars, those are the ones that are selected to become manager at some point, right? They might be excellent at what they do, but unless we give them the people skills training they need to lead effectively, they do what they do great, but they don't realize the impact of how their peers or their direct reports are dealing with their personality temperament.
And study after study shows that all of the training that is targeted toward the sales team, less than 10%, I think the number is 9% of the training is specific to managers.
Mm-hmm.
And so 91% of the training is, how to prospect, how to qualify, how to close, how to negotiate. 9% is how to hire, develop, retain talent. And, which is the most important job in the company, and nobody gets it. It's like you said, it's the battlefield promotion. Kevin, you did a great job last year. You're a number one rep. You're going to President's Club. Oh, and by the way, when you get back, you're a manager. Thoughts and prayers. Good luck.
Right.
It happens. It happens all the time. It's crazy.
It does.
So Kevin, we're talking about cliches earlier. There's another cliche: perception is reality. And I've heard you talk about the perception gap and of course blind spots. What is the perception gap? What is a blind spot? Why are they important?
Good question, Matt. So perception is reality is really a myth.
Okay.
Your perception is your reality in the moment. Let me say it again. Your perception is your reality in the moment. Now, I don't want that to sound esoteric, like some, religious thought of, what is reality? That's not the point. It's that every one of us see life through a very unique lens. And that lens is, I call it the worldview framework. That lens is the framework through which we perceive reality. We then interpret those perceptions, and then we act upon our interpretations of those perceptions, right? So it's your reality and my reality right now, probably very different. We're having this conversation, but the way you're viewing the conversation, the way you're interpreting the conversation is probably different than the way I'm trying to communicate the conversation. And this is what happens in all relationships, right? We get two or more people together, and everyone comes to that relationship with a slightly different perspective of what reality is. So as a manager now, to bring it to home, as a manager who's not really trained in the people skills, the idea of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, maybe they don't have a high level of that, which we can talk about later, so I can clarify. But the manager who approaches their sales professional with any form of communication has to put themselves into the sales professional's perspective. They have to what's called perspective taking. So they have to try to go, okay, I've got to communicate with them, not the way I like to communicate with them, my natural style. I need to understand how they best will receive my communication based on their temperament, their style, right? As an example. So you've a competitor. Competitor's very bullet point, fast paced. I got people to see, places to be, get on with it, right? It wouldn't take you very much time to tell a competitor what to do, and then they'll go off and do it. But a peacemaker is the polar opposite on the spectrum, right? They're all about people. They're about teamwork. They're about harmony. They're steady, even keel. They're not bullet points and punchlines. They want all the details. They want involvement, right? Typical competitor will walk into a peacemaker's office and start barking orders. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but just start giving out instructions or telling, whatever they're trying to communicate. And if they're not realizing they're dealing with a peacemaker is going to be really quiet. They're going to listen, but they're not going to be satisfied because they want to ask a lot more questions, but they're feeling intimidated. They're feeling a little bit reserved because this competitor is so confident and so bold and so direct. And so communication really didn't happen. Words exchanged, but the peacemaker didn't really get the essence of everything that needed to come across.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, I got introduced to this whole model of peacemaker and competitor and, like previously the DISC model and everything that evolved from that. I don't know, let's call it 10 years ago. And then when I really started studying it, I said, wow, I had my wife and my kids take it. And my wife, and I knew, and it came back and I went in and basically apologized. I'm like, okay, now I know why I was driving you crazy. Like we're literally like absolute polar opposites. Yeah, absolute polar opposites. And then I of course I waited a little bit, and then I said, and now I know why you're driving me crazy.
Right.
Right. Cause, but yeah, so kind of going back to, that's thought, I really like the way you phrase that your perception is your reality. What's the perception gap?
So it's the gap between what is said and what is heard. It's the gap between what is intended and what is perceived. For example, like I have good intentions as a competitor. I'm going to go tell this peacemaker what needs to be done because we have a mission to accomplish as an organization. And as a competitor, I'm going to go in there and my whole idea is I'm doing my job and I'm doing a good job. I'm getting things done. But the way that I am being perceived, that's the perception gap. The way I'm being perceived by the peacemaker is he can be so abrupt and really insensitive. He doesn't give me the time of day. He doesn't even let me, interject. So he's just so dominant and so, bullish,
Yeah.
and it frustrates the peacemaker. I think I'm doing great, but there's this gap between what I think how I'm behaving versus how other people perceive me behaving.
So if I say, honey, where are my keys? And she says, if you put them where you're friggin' supposed to, you'd know where they are. What's the perception gap? Nah. So, I think I want to get to the question of like, what's an example and what can in a sales environment, what can a manager do to, I think you want to reduce that gap, that you don't want there to be a gap, right? Um, and I think some of this stuff is likely more hardwired. There's attributes that hiring managers are looking for that are hardwired, and some of them that are more soft, like a soft wired or teachable and coachable. Would that be fair?
Yes and no. I cringe at the concept of hardwiring.
Okay.
All right, because if you asked earlier about myths, right? There's a controversial school of thought. Some people would say people don't change. Other people say people can change. Now, I believe people can change. I've seen it. I'm living it, right? But hardwiring, if you want to take a little softer stance on that concept, we all have a natural temperament. So again, I mentioned earlier, like if I'm not paying attention, my dominant competitor personality will just drive, and it's like autopilot. Because that if I have to get things done, especially if I'm under pressure or under stress or in conflict, all bets are off. I mean, I will naturally forget about everybody else's personalities, about everybody else's sensitivities, about everybody else, right? And everybody else, because I'm in that got to win mode, got to drive forward, got to meet these deadlines, got to meet these sales quotas, boom, right?
Yeah. Driving the killdozer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Leaving dead bodies in my wake, right? Burning relationships. So the idea then is I've got to learn how to adapt. And to do that, I've got to know. So the first, so it begins with knowing. I've got to understand different temperaments. What we do with a lot of sales teams and a lot of organizational work groups and what have you is first we start with top leadership. It's like, hey, take the blind spot assessment. Let's have a debrief. Let's talk about that. These are the dynamics within your team. And this is why sometimes you're not even on the same page, right? And then it filters down to the middle level managers and so forth. And then down finally to the boots on the street, if you will, with the sales force and any other teams. The manager is so critical because especially if a bigger organization where there's a huge gap between senior leadership and the boots on the street, if you will. But the manager.
Wait, I just want to, when you say a huge gap, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So beyond the perception gap, I'm talking about layers of management, right?
Yep.
So the CEO versus the supervisor.
Gotcha.
Right. So the managers that are in the, I like to call it this way, we need to invest in the middle. The managers in the middle are the ones that have direct contact with the masses of the sales force, of the organizational workforce. Oftentimes are more directly involved with customers, clients, and so forth. So why is it we hire subject matter experts and then don't invest in training them how to be great leaders? That's the question. Right.
Oh, and also say that the frontline manager is the most difficult job in the company
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
And everybody I know, like everybody I've almost to a person, they would say that. They would say, "Wow, that frontline," but the actions don't solve the problem. So you brought up the question, why does this happen? Why does it happen?
I think for eons of time, we have run companies and led companies, started back maybe in the old days where it's just, you do what I say. This is how it works. This is how it rolls. Um, there's a shift happening over the last several decades, slowly, but there's now a shift happening that's more recognizable, where companies are realizing that actually culture matters. It's not just about productivity and performance in the sense of driving people to do things. It's about productivity and performance is enhanced and improved actually when there's a great culture. Because when you have a great culture, people are connected, people feel seen, they feel heard, they feel valued, they get up, they're energized, they love to go to work. So we've got to start thinking about the level of management where we need to invest in that level, so that level of management knows how to connect with their people in a meaningful way, so that their people ultimately are happy. I mean, companies are trying all kinds of things, putting couches in the break room, unlimited beer, on tap, all kinds of really innovative ideas on how to create good culture and keep, attract and retain good people. But when it's all said and done, you could have all the perks in the world, and if somebody says, "I hate my boss," they're not going to stay.
Yeah. I mean, this is going back, this is a decade or more at this point where, the ping pong tables and the popcorn and, all that stuff, go down to the break room and play. But, oh, by the way, where the hell were you? Why didn't you make these calls? Why didn't you have these demos? Why didn't you have these results? Like there's a dichotomy there. And, it leads me, I think I used this example yesterday, and I want to ask you the same question. I don't know if you're a basketball fan. You don't have to be, but the Final Four, right, is kind of coming up at the time we're recording this. And two of the teams in the Final Four are Houston and Duke. And they talked about the difference between the two coaches. The Houston coach was labeled as old school. And an example is, they say the word that is ascribed to him the most is accountability. And an example is like his team's not really, with intention, like warming up. They're warming up half-ass. So he puts them on the line and starts running them on game day. Like everybody's watching in the arena, and he's got them lined up. And he's got his coaches lined up, his assistants, right? Old school. The coach of Duke, labeled as new school, is the opposite of that. When, they really trying to bring in data, getting people the right rest, bringing in a mental coach to help them with their mental game, right? Making sure they're happy and energized. Yet both teams both love their coaches and both have, extraordinary track records of success. I think you were in the military. If I found that, I think you're in the Air Force, right? So the old school code, more like the Air Force, more like the military culture. I served in the Marines. And that's that. Like, is there one like right or are they both right? Can they both be successful if you take those personalities and styles and put them in the corporate world? Can they both succeed?
Yes. As evidence.
Sorry for the long question.
No, yes, as evidenced by your story. The military command and control methodology, which was carried into a lot of organizations over the years. I mean, that works great in the military. You have to have it, right?
Right.
Because there's no time for questioning leadership, right? This is a different world, and the new generations are calling us out on that command and control concept, right? But does it mean that one style of leadership is better than another? Not necessarily, because you've got success in many different styles of leadership. What you ultimately want to look at is, does the team want to stay together? Do they like each other? Do they respect each other? Do they like the boss? They respect the boss, or in this case, the coach. Can they perform as a unit based on that style? And if they can, then you've got all cylinders firing, right? What happens most often, though, unlike the two examples you just gave, is you may have a command and control type manager trying to lead a team of salespeople or a team of IT professionals, or you name it. And that command and control isn't going to work in different environments, or it may not work in different cultures of the organization, because what you're going to have is you're going to have people in that, on those teams that are not going to respect the command and control, that are going to feel devalued because of it. And they may be there and they may be producing, but you can count on it based on Gallup's surveys year over year. You can count on it. About 59% of your workforce is constantly looking for another place to work.
They're not. And while they're doing that, they're not engaged.
That's
so
right.
It's like a double or triple whammy there.
That's right.
So when kind of bringing up the blind spot assessments, would managers benefit? For example, if I'm that old school coach of Houston, and I know that command and control is more my style, am I looking for to recruit the types of people that are going to work best in that environment? And conversely, if I'm the Duke coach, am I looking for a certain type of people that are going to work best in that environment? Because, like, for example, Bill Belichick, I'm a Boston guy. Bill Belichick, great coach, the best, all the rings, not for everybody. In fact, it's likely the main reason why he doesn't have a job right now as one of the second most winningest coach in the history of football, and the one with the most rings, but he can't get a job. So, and he was lucky, I think, to have Tom Brady, who responded well to that type of leadership, but not everybody else could or would. Is there a way to recruit the people that are going to perform the best by using things like assessments?
Yeah, absolutely. In many of the organizations that subscribe to our program, our blind spot assessments and so forth, the leader of the organization, let's call it the manager in this case, right? The manager of the organization, they need to become more aware of their own temperament, right? But then they also need to learn and understand the temperament of their people. When it comes to hiring, the best thing a manager can do, or any leader that's involved in the hiring, is identify the ideal temperament for the role at hand, right? For example, let me bring it back to corporate America, if you will, or organizations throughout the globe. If you have an open role and you're looking for somebody who is an analyst, and they're going to be sitting in front of a computer most of the day, and they're going to be doing a lot of very detailed work, and it takes a lot of focus. You may not want to hire a motivator, because a motivator by temperament has a hard time focusing. Yeah, squirrel. Did you see that?
Yeah, I resemble that remark. Yeah. The saying, Kevin, is those folks have a Google search engine on their forehead, and when people are talking to them, they're processing what they're going to say next.
There you go. So, you identify the role. And so it's not necessarily trying to find all the same people, because let's say the coach or the manager in this case is a competitor. You don't want to find all competitors just because that's who you resonate better with. What you need to do, take ownership and say, okay, I need a well-rounded team, and I need to learn how to adapt to others that are not like me. And we can go down that path all the way into DEI conversations, but we have a tendency to hire people like us, and that doesn't always provide a well-balanced team. I was doing a training workshop, for example, and I usually break people into tables and groups, and we have different discussions, and everybody's talking at the table, and usually there's a number of different temperaments. And I walked over this one table. It was a multi-organization event at a conference. I walked over this one table they were all from the same work group, and they had no competitor style or anything close to it. They were peacemakers and connectors, stabilizers, all sort of in that people-oriented quadrant as opposed to task-oriented. Mm-hmm. And I looked at him. I said, what you looks like from the dynamics here, you might want to consider adding a competitor to your team. They all laughed and they said, heck no, we don't want any troublemakers. So, that's again, perceptions, but if you really want a great team, you've got to have a very good balanced mix. Here's another example from a sales organization. I was coaching and meeting with two of the top sales leaders in this organization years ago. One was very direct, total competitor, just bullet points, punchlines, little rough around the edges. And he was a top sales leader. The other guy was more of a connector. He was this outgoing, motivational, inspirational type, charismatic person. He was not direct. He was more relational, took his time. If it took longer to close the deal, not a problem for him because he just built the relationship and eventually closed the deals. Both top producers. Right. But, you don't want all competitors because then you're going to have friction on the team anyway. That was a really good balance between the two.
And doesn't that put the responsibility or put more pressure, for lack of a better word, on the manager to understand their own blind spots, understand how they're wired so they can best identify what motivates and how their people, the temperaments of their people, so that they can, again, meet each person where they are. That's not easy. I believe I get that. Like, I don't want to say I fully get it, but I really get that now. I don't know that I definitely didn't know that years ago. And I wonder, like, if you need someone to teach you that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it
Yeah,
doesn't,
nobody comes out of the womb and the doctor says, hey, a leader.
right.
Right?
So it kind of, well, I think some do believe that happens. Like, that's the leaders are born, not made. But I think what we're saying is that they're made, they're developed. You have to learn, you have to be a student of the business. Right.
Yeah.
Would that be fair? Yeah.
You really do.
So, I found this, early this morning. I was, doing some last minute research and I came across something you posted on LinkedIn about the topic of psychological safety. And the reason why I bring it up is that's come up on this show a couple of times, fairly recently, the importance of it and kind of how to provide it, et cetera. And you remarked that psychological safety is easy to talk about, but it's hard to model. And you talked about an example. Care to elaborate?
Yeah, that was quite an interesting event that took place. So as I usually do, I'll set up interviews with organizations that are interviewing me to consider me as a speaker for their event. And this was no different. So this is a major, a big company, global company, and it was one of the U.S. divisions. And they contacted me and said, hey, we love your blind spot story. We love your message. We really want to energize our troops, and we really want you to highlight psychological safety so we can improve our culture and people know that they can feel free to share whatever's going on and to, therefore we can have open communication. And I understood the concept. It's a great concept. I mean, people want to be seen, feel heard and valued and so forth. And so during this 30-minute interview, they asked me a lot of questions about the topic, about the content and my delivery style and various, questions like that a lot of organizations ask. They never once asked me about my prison story, which was interesting because
that was in everything that you talk about. That's in your video, it's in your book, it's in your website. Like that had to be one of the reasons why they sought you.
Exactly. That's say don't bury the lead. Well, that's the lead, right? So the assumption is in this interview with me is that they know about the story. They've watched my video or heard through one of my attendees at the conferences or whatever. So we never really got into the story. But then what happened is accidentally, one of the leaders that were in this panel interview copied me on their internal conversation about me.
There's a lot of that
And
stuff going on these days.
right, it's a faux pas on their part. And what was really sad and quite disturbing was the conversation that they had about me instead of with me, which
So I'm interrupting here. I just want to like make sure the audience understands this and that I do. You're accidentally on this thread and they're going back and forth and they don't know that you're on this thread yet. And
right.
you just kind of seeing how this goes. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm watching their conversation back and
Yeah.
forth, and they're bad mouthing. They're saying that that I'm acting like I'm innocent, that I never did anything wrong, that it was like that I'm the martyr. It's like we didn't even talk about any of that. You don't even know my story. You never asked. All you got was the sound bites, right? And so I was pretty disturbed by it, and I emailed them back. I basically said, I said, you asked me to speak about psychological safety. I said, and here you're demonstrating that this is not a safe place for people to be able to be vulnerable. I said, I'm going to have to bow out of this opportunity. And then all I got back from them was not an apology for the things they said, but only an apology that they included me in.
Did you respond in that note that you responded to that whole group with the thread underneath of all the, yeah.
Yeah, I replied all.
Yeah. That's
They
great.
all got to see what happened. And rightfully so, they should apologize for including me, but they should have also addressed the elephant in the room, which was they were bad mouthing me, judging my character without even knowing me. And so I felt compelled that I was talking to a buddy on the golf course, and he said, "That's an amazing story." He said, "You should write about that." I'm like, "You're right. I'm going to put a blog together." So I wrote the blog, and I sent the blog over to not only the speaking bureau that had scheduled the appointment. I let them know why I bowed out, but I sent the article over to the people on that thread and just said, "Hey, no hard feelings on my part, but I feel like this is a lesson that everybody should learn."
Yeah. And, I think if you want the feel good ending to that, I feel like it could be the leadership saying, you know what, you're right. And we're not only are we going to bring you on and speak, but we're also going to acknowledge what we did.
Yeah, that would have been,
Again, like really like lean into the problem and say, yeah, you know what, you're 100% right. We should have brought it up. We should learn. And I think their people would get so much more out of that type of session, that type of training. Instead, no one's probably going to know about it and go
yeah,
on doing the same shit.
they won't know about it unless unless they stumble into my website and read the blog. But you bring up a really good point, because when it's usually leadership that puts on the facade and doesn't acknowledge blind spots when everybody else sees them, right? And so that creates a gap in the relationship. It creates disconnect, because you're acting like everything's good, but we see that it's not, and you won't acknowledge it. You won't talk about it. There's no safety in this.
Yeah.
What we need to do, and this is what we'll have a lot of our organizations do with the blind spot assessment. We call it the leader's conversation. So you take the blind spot assessment, takes 3 minutes to fill it out by the individual. So it's
Very
really
easy.
fast, super fast, super easy to understand, because it's not written by academics. It's written in layman's terms so people can remember it. And then you have everybody in your team take the assessment. In fact, let me just give you a practical example. I was working with a healthcare, coaching a leader in a healthcare organization, healthcare insurance. And this leader had 21 direct reports. She had just taken over a huge team, and she was trying to parse it out to see who belongs where. But she had to take over and lead the team with 21 direct reports. That's absurd.
Yeah.
So she called all the direct reports in. She took the blind spot assessment. She had all of them take it, and she scheduled a 30-minute conversation using our format. And she said, "Hey, I just want to talk about blind spots, and I want to be the first to be vulnerable here." Wow. It's like, you want to catch your team's attention. You say the word vulnerable to them, and don't ask them to be vulnerable. You just show vulnerability, and it'll be mind blowing for them. So she said, "I want to be vulnerable." And she shared some of her blind spots with the team. And everybody, of course, is probably rolling their eyes going, "Well, we already knew."
Yeah.
But for the boss to say, "Hey, these are areas I'm still working on, and I give you permission to call me out if you see these blind spots, because I want to build relationships with you guys. And I know if I don't pay attention to my blind spots, will not be able to do that. Right. That opened up a phenomenal conversation, as it always does, because now everybody's feeling like I can be vulnerable. My boss is vulnerable. I can be a little bit vulnerable. Right. And now I can share my blind spots. And the beauty is they're all pointing to a third party instrument, which has already called out the blind spots. And so it's easy to say, okay, well, the blind spot assessment points this out. And you know what? Yeah, it's right. Here, let me tell you about this. And then people are like, oh, you're human? You've got blind spots too? This is really kind of cool.
Yeah.
What she discovered, to close the story, Matt, what she discovered is 30 minutes wasn't enough time.
Oh, I was thinking that right when you
She
minutes,
I mean, all of them asked, can we finish in this discussion in another session? So she booked another hour at another date so that everybody had a chance to talk. And she said it was amazing.
Yeah. And there's 20, 21, 22 people in that room. Yeah. You need a long time. Time and time again, I hear stories like that, and it's refreshing. But it's also like, yeah, of course that works. And the story that you just told, and then we talk about the importance in sales of building a practice culture and role play, and that whenever you do role plays, the manager should always go first. Hey, let me give this a try. I'm not going to be, perfect on this, and give me some feedback. But once they go first, then, everyone else should feel a little bit more comfortable to do so. And then my friend and sales leader colleague, Ollie Kwitek, he tells us a phenomenal story about like trying to get the organization to embrace the failure. Like failure is okay. Like you can fail forward fast. And, he brought his whole team together. He had a big team. He brought his whole sales team together and said, let's go around the room. They had a microphone. They were in a big room. Let's go around the room and let's talk about some time in your life where you massively failed and how you felt and what you may have learned from it. Let me start. And he told, this really heartbreaking, crazy situation that he shared that, most people, almost nobody in the room knew. And he told it, and it's like, oh crap. If he's telling that story, let me tell you, I got one for you. Now everyone's trying to one up each other with their crazy failure stories, and people learn from it. So the leader's conversation, I love it. Yeah.
The leader's conversation, Matt, is because it all boils down to, in this scenario, vulnerability. And vulnerability, I love Brene Brown. If you haven't listened to Brene Brown's podcast, you should. Phenomenal woman. I mean, and she's all about vulnerability, right? And vulnerability begets vulnerability. And then there's this conundrum because it takes trust to have vulnerability, but it takes vulnerability to establish trust, right? So it takes trust on the leader's part to say, you know what, I need to step out and demonstrate vulnerability and just trust that I'm going to be able to connect with my people and they're not going to, harbor it against me or use it against me politically or something like that. And even if they do, that happens so seldom, but it does happen. But you have to have enough trust to say, I need to be vulnerable. The minute you demonstrate vulnerability, others will suddenly feel safe to be vulnerable. And I'm not talking about dumping all your stuff. That's not the level of vulnerability. I'm talking about just being human, right? Like you said, let's talk about our biggest failures and let me start because I'm human, right? And everybody here is going to make mistakes and that's okay because we're all human.
You mentioned politically and vulnerability in the same sentence. That would be a whole training in and of itself that taxpayers might benefit from and want to fund.
I wasn't talking DC politics. I was talking internal politics.
I know. So, Kevin, you've been blind spot leadership development. You've been doing this for a while now. What are you most excited about? Like, what keeps you motivated to keep doing what you're doing?
I don't have a job. That's the beauty of this. Like, who said it? When you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life, right?
Yeah.
I love what I do because after I came out of prison and studied cognitive science, psychology, realized I need to help as many people as I can mitigate their blind spots. We all have them. And yet if we can learn what they are and then learn how to mitigate their impact on our behaviors and decisions, we'll be better leaders, better spouses, better parents, just better people all around. Because generally it's blind spots that cause relationship problems. Most of the time we have breakdowns in communication, right? Breakdowns in how we want to raise our kids all these breakdowns is a lot of times just boils down to, well, we have two different perceptions of the world. How do we communicate effectively with each other so we can bridge that gap? Right. So that's what drives me, is the knowing that every message I share, every book I write, every audience I'm with, I'm making an impact, and I'm leaving people behind that can take that and move forward with it. So with that's why recently, in the last couple of years, I started to license out the blind spot assessment to coaches, trainers, organizational leaders. We just signed up the American Board of Radiology as an example. I love what they're doing, by the way. Side note.
Yeah. So I have a really good friend who's a radiologist,
Oh,
and
great.
I always bust his chops. I'm like, all you do is look at pictures, which is far from the truth. But what are you doing with the American Board of Radiology?
Yeah, no, it's great because they signed up and they're solving one of the biggest problems in organizational workforces, which is they're investing in the middle. What they did is they sat through a training program, a leadership training program with one of my certified coaching organizations. So that exposed them to the blind spot assessment. Then they called me and said, hey, we're building a leadership program for all of our aspiring and middle level managers in the association. So it's internal. It's not for all their members at this point. It's just for their internal organization. And she said, we love the blind spot assessment. We want to make that part of our ongoing leadership development program. Can we subscribe to use it? And so, yeah, it was a no brainer. They signed up, and it's great because it's unlimited use. So it's no nickel and diming based on how many assessments and all that. That's what they loved. It's like, whether it's a few people this time or whether it's a whole cadre of people going through their program, there's no cost to them other than their modest annual subscription. So that's what we're doing with the Board of Radiology. And why I highlight them is because they've got a model right there that every organization, if they would only invest in creating a model, a leadership training program for the aspiring and that middle management group, and teach them the people skills they need to lead effectively, it'd be life-changing for the organization's bottom line.
Yeah. I gotta think that you've changed people's lives. That aha moment when you go through some sort of training session, and you start to think about it, like someone who really goes and says, yeah, I have this blind spot. The type of stuff that you're talking about, Kevin, can be life-changing, right? It can certainly help your career and things like that, but it could save your marriage. It could save your relationship with your kids. What I love about like training that I got through my career is that it's all transferable outside of work.
100%.
And, the Sandler sales training, the leadership training, the assessments training, all of this stuff helped me with my professional career, but it helped me more with my family and my wife, my children, my friends, and at no extra charge.
Yeah.
And so you must have stories of people who've come to you or wrote you and said, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing because, right?
Yeah, that's a fairly common thread. There's always people in the audience that want to come up and tell me their story and appreciate, what they've just learned and how they're going to apply it. I spoke to,
they didn't absorb it enough to know that, that you're a competitor and you just want the bullet points, but yeah.
Some of them actually bring that point up, but I usually tell them it's okay. I've learned to adapt. Tell me your story.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, speaking of marriage, my ex and I, that was one of our difficulties. Is I'm a competitor. She wasn't. So she was always on and on and on and on. And I'm just like, get to the point, because I didn't know and she didn't know. This is way back when, before prison. And now I realize in my new relationship and everything else, we now understand each other's temperaments. We can work with that. Right. And just to your point, it's all of this carries over into your personal life. In fact, I wish I would have known this as a teenager. I'm working with some school districts with the idea that I wonder if we could actually apply this somehow to young people. So that's coming. That's a forthcoming
Or teachers.
project.
Or
Yeah,
teachers.
teachers for sure. Yeah. I
Talk about that.
just did an event for an entire school district for their incoming getting kickoff for the new year. It was back in August. So yeah, it's powerful concepts, Matt, that we need to own the fact that we have blind spots, be okay with that, be comfortable in those blind spots, and then be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I've got blind spots and let me share with them. Let me address the one I just stumbled across and hurt your feelings because of. Let's have that conversation. It's okay.
So it's just awesome conversation. We'll close out here with a couple of questions that I ask all of the guests. We're the Coach2Scale podcast. So we talk about coaching and leading and developing people. We bring on guests who care about doing stuff like that. And usually people who care about leadership and coaching and developing had that behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. Who's someone whose coaching has had an impact on your life and how you approach things today?
Wow. Well, let's go full circle back to the prison story. Because I met the Godfather. That's what I warmly called Joe the Godfather. He wasn't labeled that by anybody. But the reason I said that is because when I first got to prison, I went into prison a very different person. I went into prison with that command and control leadership style, get her done. I was able to, have a couple successful companies, some other learning experiences. But I go into prison and now I've got 500 roommates in these two dormitories that were just a mix, a can of mixed nuts, if you will. All different styles.
Literally.
All different. Well, there were a few nuts, but all different styles, personalities, you name it. As I began studying this cognitive psychology, I began observing and realizing the differences in all these people and appreciating every one of their differences and appreciating who they were as a human being. And so I quickly met somebody named Joe. Now, Joe is a career criminal, never had a job in his life. He was in his early 50s when I met him. And he took me under his wing, which sometimes can be a scary thing. I was warned in prison because he'll want something. Turns out he turned his life around and found Jesus, I guess, earlier in his walk. And so he was a different person himself. So we connected. And he did a lot of coaching. He just did a lot of mentorship with me as a fairly younger, much younger person. And, he helped me understand how to communicate with my family.
That's that's a great point that you just made. Cause I'm thinking you're kind of you right now in prison, but you weren't you right now. You were like probably 30, 40 years old, something, back then.
Yeah.
That was like 20 years ago, right? Yeah. Okay. Got it.
That 21 years ago, in fact. So I was a different person back then. I came out of prison, a changed person, because again, I worked on me, right? How often do we get to stop the minutia of the fast pace of life long enough to really say, I'm going to work on me, right? I never did. Now I do. And so he had a huge impact on who I would become. There was he didn't know it, but there was an Officer Howard. He had a huge impact in who I would become. Most of the guards were mean. Most of the inmates didn't like the guards. Officer Howard was a supervisory guard, but he respected everybody in the prison. Like he treated every inmate, no matter whether you're a career criminal or a first-time offender, he treated everyone as a human being and gave them the dignity and respect of being a human being. He didn't trash talk them. He didn't treat them like secondhand citizens. And everybody respected him because of it. And that was an eye-opener for me. I was like, wow, you don't have to be a jerk to get things done or get people to behave a certain way. You can actually be human, be vulnerable. Yeah. As a guard, he was vulnerable. He wasn't, no pretense with Howard. Yeah. And so everybody really respected him. I'm like, you know what? That's good leadership right there. And that was part of my quest. And then I'll wrap it up to say, who is a favorite coach that I don't know personally, but I respect greatly. And that would be Marshall Goldsmith. Love Marshall Goldsmith.
Yeah.
He's a very high-end coach, very successful, wrote many good books. I love his material, but he and I, we have a lot of the same thinking when it comes to how to be a better leader. It's like you have to learn to be a better leader. It doesn't always come natural.
Well, I think that's a really good place to leave it, Kevin. Fantastic conversation, just eye-opening, learned a lot. And I really appreciate your time and coming on here today.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to staying in touch.
All right. And for everybody out there, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed what we brought today. Let us know you're out there. Engage with us on LinkedIn. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you didn't like. Let us know what you'd like to see more. If we want to bring content and we want to bring guests to you that give you ideas, give you tips, entertain you, and just generally speaking, help make your very hard job just a little bit easier. So thanks for listening. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at CoachEm.io. That's CoachEm.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachEmNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.